Without further ado, why don't I introduce our speaker tonight, Richard Stout. Richard is a native of Beaumont, Texas, has spent much of his life living in Houston. However, his career has taken an important direction. In 1953, he enrolled at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where he sought his BFA. After graduating in 1957, he looked about for a city that was to his liking and, to his surprise, returned basically home to Houston, where the city was experiencing not only unprecedented growth, but a tremendous amount of investment in time, money, and effort in the arts. In 1965, he began teaching at the University of Houston, a long career, 30 years, that only concluded with his retirement in 1995. It is during that time that he also decided to seek his MFA, which he received from the University of Texas at Austin. Richard's work is in numerous important collections around the country, including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Denver Art Museum, the Butler Institute for the Arts, the Dallas Museum of Art, and of course the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. Richard continues to practice his craft. He just opened a show this year at William Reeves Fine Art in Houston, and if you're interested in what he's doing these days, work from this year, just get on William Reeves' website and you can see what Richard's been up to. So, without further ado, I will let him tell you the rest of the story. Please join me in welcoming Richard Stout.
Where's the little, oh, here we are. Yeah.
There you are.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight and thank Mark White for asking me to come to see you tonight and talk with my experience at this time and my experience in Houston. Remember, I'm a painter. I'm not a lecturer, and I'll do my best. I'm not an art historian, but I've done a little bit of work on this, and I think that I can safely say this it should be fairly entertaining. I apologize for some of the slides. I wasn't able to get absolutely perfect pixelization on some of the early pieces, but my son was able to help me make them look better. Some of the slides look like they've been through a flood, but that's okay. There was a flood. Every city develops a shape of how it puts together its cultural history. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, that shape is very largely engineered by a group of women who had the interest and the time to and the desire to do this. And I'm going to speak first about one such woman who was instrumental in shaping the point of view that was to be central to the making of Houston art as we see it today. Of course, there were many others. I can't go through all the names, but there were many others. But definitely this woman and many other women played a vital part in this. Her name was working. Okay, I could do this. Okay, there we go. This woman was Emma Richardson Cherry. She was born in Aurora, Illinois, near Chicago in 1859, and she in 1887 she was living in Kansas City, where she was a member of the Kansas City Sketch Club, which later became the Kansas City Art Institute. Miss Cherry got married at that time, but shortly she went off to 1888 to New York City to study with this man, William Merritt Chase, who taught a lot of people in the last part of the 19th century and was probably America's most notable teacher of Impressionist painting. Miss Cherry went to France to study in 1889, to Giverny to study from André Lot, and then back to the States, to Denver with her husband and new baby in 1891. At that time, Denver had a population of 100,000 people. When her husband moved to Houston in 1896, her brother, who lived in Galveston, said, "Oh, don't go there. It's a mud hole. You won't like it." Her brother lived in Galveston, a big town of 45,000. Houston had barely 30,000 people, and of course, we knew what. This is a painting. This is a painting by Mrs. Cherry from that period in France, early period in France. You see quite a credible painting by a young woman in her early 30s. So she moved to Houston, and we know what happened in Houston. We have another one?
Yes.
I think this might work. You're still on? Okay. Moved to, this is quite a credible painting by a young woman in her 30s, but she moved to Houston, and her brother's big town of Galveston, the largest city in Texas in 1900, suffered a devastating hurricane, which killed more than 6,000 people. And this is one of those slides that looked like it went through the hurricane. But what turned everything around was the very next year, not even 6 months later, oil was discovered in Spindletop, just south of my hometown of Beaumont, and started the big oil boom. You can see over here on the right-hand side, all these gentlemen standing on that platform with hats on, having the oil demonstrated for them. Let's look at this. Why don't you invest your money in this? And they did. And this was the beginning of the big oil companies, Gulf, Pure, Humboldt, Texaco, et cetera, and so forth. I'm not sure all of those began exactly, but you know, the oil companies kind of merged along the way. But this was the real big beginning. So the Beaumont was not large enough at 15,000 to support this. Houston was a little bit bigger and had a better transportation system. And Galveston was out of the running, and they had to move it somewhere, so they decided to move it into Houston. A lot of big talent in business and in commerce came to Houston at this time, which had previously been important for cotton and lumber and cattle, but now became big in oil. One of the first millionaires, William Marsh Rice, who made his millions in the 19th century, left his entire fortune to this institution, Rice Institute, which opened in it was chartered before, but opened in 1907 on 295 acres southwest of downtown. Rice Institute, now Rice University, was a completely free school. No tuition. If your grades were good enough, you could go there. And a lot of the people that I knew in Houston, that I'll show you slides of a little bit later on, were students at Rice University. About the same time, George Hermann, who had also made a big amount of money in Houston prior to that time, gave this large section of land here, this open greenery on the right-hand side, and then a bunch of skyscrapers there on the left-hand side, to the city of Houston as Hermann Park. The whole thing, which was 445 acres, was trimmed down by 134 acres taken off. This part over here on the left side taken off by the city in 1921 or 22 to be the home of the Texas Medical Center, which is the largest concentration of medical facilities in the world. Rice University is, you see directly above the City Beautiful area here, the red roofs, and the little up there, I don't have a pointer now, that little triangle of space up there that's white, that is where the Museum of Fine Arts is. You will see that later. Also, in 1913, just prior to this, the Houston Symphony was founded. And so the Houston Symphony is not one of those first 6 symphony orchestras in the country, but it's in the next 3 or 4, a very important institution. In 1914, the Houston Ship Channel was started and built to ship out all that oil and everything else. Galveston wasn't working anymore and still on its heels. This is a view of a part of the ship channel which is literally 50 miles long, and of course downtown in the distance. Recent view didn't look like that in 1914. And the Museum of Fine Arts, the central building of the Museum of Fine Arts was opened in 1924. The Museum of Fine Arts itself was chartered in 1917. So in a period of 10 years, all of these major institutions happened in Houston. And during this time, Mrs. Cherry was painting, teaching, making a bit of a living doing this and doing paintings, traveling to Europe and doing paintings of this nature. When she was in France, she was sort of nicknamed Cerise by her friends. Who was painting from the 20s. In the 20s, she became a member of the Society Anatomy in New York and became friends with Marcel Duchamp, Man Ray, and Catherine Dreyer. She was also a close friend of Marston Hartley, a painter dear to my heart. This is a more typical kind of flower painting that she did in the 30s to pay her bills. She had a student named Ola McNeil Davidson, who was a significant teacher in her own right. This is Ola McNeil Davidson, who in the 30s taught a group of people who were loosely associated with the theater, sometimes doing sets for Margot Jones, the great young theater director who started her career in Houston with WPA projects. The first theater in the round ever in the United States was with Margot Jones in Houston in the 30s, late 30s. And but this woman, Ola McNeil Davidson, had a group of students. Corinne Spellman, who did this, a painting of the actress. And Corinne Spellman was probably maybe 20 at the time. Frank Deleshka, I owned this painting. Frank gave it to my wife and myself back in the 70s. Frank Deleshka was her student. He did this painting in 1938 when he was 17 years old. This painting by Forrest Bess. Also from the same period and the same time, and the same age. You'll hear more about Forrest Bess later on, who had a major exhibition of his later work at the Menil Collection 2 years ago. And this painting, this is a later painting by Robert Pruser. And, when she was teaching Robert Pruser, he was so clearly brilliant that she took him at the age of 18 to Chicago to work with Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, the director of the Institute of Design, who was in the Bauhaus, new Bauhaus in Berlin, and was forced out by Hitler, and came to Chicago under the wing of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, the architect. And this is a piece, a photogram by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. His book, Vision in Motion, was one of the Bibles of all art students of my generation. Going back to the Galveston storm, I lost a great uncle in the Galveston storm, so the Galveston storm and our place, and we had a place on Galveston Bay that we always went to. We always talked about the storm in Galveston. And we also always knew about the Spindletop. I lived not far from Spindletop. At a recent book on mid-century Texas art shows a painting of mine done when I was 14 or 15 that I did on the spot in the oil fields south of Beaumont. And this is downtown Beaumont with the port, the courthouse, the Art Deco courthouse, and the refineries beyond. It was a good-sized port. I lived on that side of town. We barely scraped through, but we scraped through. We had to get scholarships to go to school. My brother went to Rice. He was smart. I was very good at drawing and painting, and thanks to the support of very good programs in the public school system, I was able to get a lot of attention from not only the teachers in public schools and Scholastic Art Awards programs, but a new art league in Houston. I was their fair-haired boy, and at the opening of the new Beaumont Art Museum at the time, I was right there at the opening, and once again knew the director of the museum, Wei Hoffman, who had been taught by Zigozek in Paris in the 30s. You have a watercolor in this museum in a collection above a fireplace by Zigozek. You should take a look at it. It was wonderful for me to see. But okay, at this time, Frank Deleshka and Robert Prusser, while I'm away in Chicago at the Art Institute, I'll tell you more about that in a minute, in 1948, together with a group of interested people in the city of Houston, had put together the Contemporary Arts Association, which dealt with painting, sculpture, film, architecture, music, and everything. Well, why not do everything? So they tried to do everything. And they did remarkably well without a director for, I think maybe 8 years. Our local naive artist, the much beloved Frank Fried, who well-traveled and adroit in every way, did this delightful painting of an opening at the Contemporary Arts Association with people that we all knew. This is Gertrude Barnstone. You'll see a painting by her a bit later. Her husband, Howard, easily the most brilliant young architect in town at the time. And here, Alvin Romansky, who always had bad problems with dandruff. If you look at the painting, there are little white dots all over. And notice this, the waiter over here, the only black man in the whole picture. You'll see a big change right away. In order to put these shows together, people would just go out and get paintings from their friends' houses and hang them on the wall. Oh, let's have a show. Or let's do a show about garden art. Or let's do a show about furniture. And they would go to the shops and so on and put it together. It became clear that in time that they had to do a little bit better job. About this time, 49, Texas Southern University hires John Biggers to head the department. John Biggers was a brilliant man, a wonderful teacher. And he himself hired Carroll Sims, another brilliant man, the first black man to graduate from Cranbrook Academy. Both of these men were friends of mine and were tremendously important to the city of Houston. They taught a whole group of people, which the second generation of which now are in every major exhibition in Houston, and having major exhibition. One recently just won a MacArthur, $750,000 MacArthur grant. Living in Beaumont and coming home on holidays from Chicago, I would see a few people who were working in Houston at the time, and oh, that's not bad. That's David Addix. He had just come back from Paris. He'd been working at the Leger studio. That's pretty, that's better than Buffet, Dubuffet, not Buffet, not Dubuffet. And his friend, who was from the School of Music and Art in New York, came down to Houston to visit, liked it and stayed. Herb Mears, who also went to the Leger School, and Paul Maxwell, who was then teaching at the University of Houston in the art department, and also was a correspondent on the first public television station in the United States, a correspondent giving interviews of artists in the city. And this was in 1951. Back at the Contemporary Arts Museum again, and they hire the woman on the right, Germaine McCaggy, who had come to us from the San Francisco Legion of Honor. Legion of Honor, where she did exhibitions, and on the right, she's on the right, and on the left, Dominique Demenil. Dominique and John Demenil moved to Houston during the Second War, and the head of the Schlumberger oil mapping company from Paris, and That's a Rene Magritte above. They have a great collection of Magritte. And they at once had an exhibition, the second exhibition in a museum of the work of Mark Rothko. Jack Boynton, who you'll see work later on, and Jim Love unpacked the Mark Rothkos in the Dimonil garage to take to the museum to show at the museum. The second exhibition of Mark Rothko in the United States in 1956 or 7. This is the Menil House. It was built in '48 by Philip Johnson with an interior, with elements in the interior by her dress designer, Charles James, who probably America's best-known couturier, and who designed furniture. There's recently an exhibition at the Metropolitan in New York of the work of Charles James, and also a smaller exhibition including some of the furniture from the house. The house is open privately to special guests. It's installed by the family on occasion with different things from the collection. Back to Robert Pruser. He goes off to MIT to work with Kepish. This is the other big book, the Language of Vision and Vision in Motion. The other one being the Search for the Real by Hans Hoffmann, the books that all of us who went to school in the 50s had to have and had to know about. And worked with Kepish at MIT in higher levels of visual art and to his death. This is where I went to school, School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And we had to walk through those doors, past those big lions. At 8 o'clock in the morning, they let us in. We would then, to get to our class, have to walk under this El Greco, hello, to get to class, or between the two full cast sculptures of the Gattamelata and the Il Coglione, the great Renaissance equestrian statues. We spent our coffee time in the galleries to see works like this Picasso blind guitarist, this wonderful Matisse from 1917, a great painting, 4 times the size of this. And this wonderful Picabia, a new book by the Catalogue Raisonné of Francis Picabbia's Picabia, first volume is coming out this January. And then we would go upstairs. They were adding paintings to the collection, and we were just astonished at the paintings that were coming into the collection in the mid-50s, like The Great Rainbow by Jackson Pollock, and this excavation by, I consider, de Kooning's greatest painting. We just collapsed in front of these paintings because they opened so many doors of possibilities as to what we could do. We could do anything. There were no rules for painters anymore. If we could show it, we could prove it, we could do it. And so I did this. I was 21. And then I did, a year later, I did this and another one similar to it. And then I graduated and took stacks of work home from the Art Institute. I figured out where I was going to go to live and decided on Houston after looking. I had standards. I had a musical background too. I wanted good music, and I wanted a good museum, and I wanted good climate, and I wanted nice people and young people. And so I moved to Houston because of those things and because of this. This is the Cullinan Hall that was being built when I moved to Houston. Chicago was full of work by Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe was wonderful for us. It was just thrilling to have such a wonderful architect with you. And I went to this house that Robert Pruser, the guy I've been showing you a lot of work of, and his wife built about the time they built the Contemporary Arts Museum in '48. But he was off to MIT, and so his friends, who had also been students of his, moved into this house, Leila McConnell and Henry Gabois. Leila McConnell's in this show. And my friend Preston Frazier, who was my contact in Houston, took me the second night I was in Houston to the party at this house on the bayou, and I met everyone. This is an early painting by Leila. This is, you know, after she had gone to Italy, and she had studied with Rothko some, and with Still some, and other places. All these people had studied around lots of places. They got out. They moved around. They were not isolated. And this is Henry's, and they were all had been students of Robert Prusser, among others. Bill Condon, who is also from Rice, and that's one of his pictures. He was an architect, and this is one of his paintings of Rice. Stella Sullivan, I went to her 90th birthday last Saturday. She went to Cranbrook. After Rice, she went to Cranbrook. Gertrude Barnstone, that young lady that I showed down there, she did this when she was at the University of Houston. She went to Rice and the University of Houston. I take Gertrude to breakfast every Friday. She's 93. No, she's 89. Sorry. Lowell Collins, studied everywhere. The head of education at the Museum of Fine Arts said, Lowell, you've got to come home from, where was he? He was, I think, at the Art Students League in New York at the time, and be the director of the new Museum School of Art, which was in the basement of the new Museum Van der Rohe building, and I started working for this man. This man was an angel. And the potter that we had working in the ceramics lab was the great potter of Southeast Texas, Ruth Laird. I have a large collection of Ruth's work, fortunately. She also went to Cranbrook. This is McKee Trotter. Was Fort Worth, as you may have heard, was a hotspot for modern thinking in this period. And in the studio of Charles Williams, sculptor, Jack Boynton and his wife Anne, and McKee Trotter, his teacher, all getting together and talking about modern issues in the early 50s in Fort Worth. And so Jack moved to Houston. He had some opportunities there. This painting in the exhibition is from that period. And this painting by Jack Boynton. Jack and I shared a studio in 1958, 59, and early 1960. In fact, I saw a painting, I'm sure that painting I saw today in the basement of this institution here was painted in that studio. Also at this time, and an important artist for us at this time, which indicates also some aspect of surrealism with regards to the Houston point of view, not only the large aspect of surrealism in the Menil collection, which was available to us all. Guy Johnson, I taught at Lee College of Baytown and regularly had exhibitions in Houston from that point on. Here's a Forrest Best. I'm showing you two. He had this big show at the Menil collection 2 years ago, quite important collection. He showed in Houston all the time. He showed with Betty Parsons in New York before he showed in Houston at the New Arts Gallery, my gallery. And he lived in a fishing shack, a tar paper fishing shack on the Intercoastal Canal. You had to honk your horn and he would row a boat across the canal and get you and take you over and feed you shrimp head soup and steak and entertain you with his stories. Another painting by Forrest Best. And our close friend Jim Love, the sculptor, who was perhaps the drollest man I've ever met. He also showed at the New Arts Gallery. This belongs to the Alley Theater. It's called Area Code. Jack Boynton and Jim Love were the closest of friends. This bouquet of flowers, which is in the Sid Richardson College at Rice University, made from wheels and gears and such, similar to a piece that was purchased by the Museum of Fine Arts through the Southwest show that James Johnson Sweeney put together for the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. My closest friend in the world, Dick Ray. This really isn't purple, this is really gray. It's a fault of the whatever. Painting called Bull. We traded paintings in 1961, and I've had this hanging in my house since that time. Dick passed away about 3 years ago. The other painting in the show, which was painted in the room above my studio, I saw him working on this green brass man. This is in the show, the current show. And this was our leader, in a way. This is James Johnson Sweeney, arguably the most important force in contemporary art in the world at the time. When the museum was looking for a new director, and John Dimnell heard that Sweeney had quit the Guggenheim Museum because he didn't like the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, he picked up the phone, called him, and hired him to come and be our director, and he was our director for 7 years. He really supported us greatly, particularly Jack, Jim, Dorothy, Hood, me, who you'll see, me, and made big changes. Dorothy Hood, who had graduated from Houston, went to the Rhode Island School of Design, spent 20 years in Mexico City, got married to a Bolivian composer, moved back to Houston briefly to have a show at Catherine Swinson's New Arts Gallery, then back to Mexico City for a year and a half, then moved permanently to Houston and had another show of her wonderful drawings at the Museum of Fine Arts under the support of James Johnson Sweeney, and then started showing with, this is an early painting by Dorothy Hood, indicating some of the surrealist aspect of her work. But when she came to Houston, and this is a little bit later than the one I'm going to show you next, when she came to Houston, it was the beginning of the space age. Space age. Dorothy had a very good, big career with these very large paintings. This painting would have maybe been half again or twice the size of what you see. She was much loved, and her paintings always were absolutely thrilling to look at. It was about this time, early 60s, mid-60s, John O'Neill came from the University of Oklahoma to Rice University to be head of the department. This is one of John's paintings. I got to know John fairly well. As he was getting ready to retire, we were visiting more and more over coffee and talking about various times and things. And his first 2 hires didn't stick. This is, of course, a Bavinger. We were getting a lot of paintings coming in from outside to the New Arts Gallery in the late 50s, a lot of things from San Francisco, Hassel Smith and Walter Kuhlman, who were all out of that mix of the San Francisco Art Institute thing, and Bavinger showing at the Watson Gallery, as well a few other people showing in other places. Most of the Houston galleries were showing Houston people, which was kind of refreshing. New York really didn't make an important foray as to showing New York paintings in Houston until the late 70s. Here you all, of course, know the wonderful Bruce Goff house. We have one in Houston. It's called the Eyebrow House. Everyone drives down the street in Memorial. There. And but here's one of a painting by Earl Staley, as he was hired by John O'Neill for Rice University, and a year later hiring Bob Camblin, this print by Bob Camblin. Neither one of these men worked out with Rice University, so after their first term they left and started working at St. Thomas in an ad hoc art situation with Pat Colville. Another artist that came at this time, late 60s, was straight from Amsterdam, but an American, was Charles Arthur Turner. And then moving up from Galveston, even took part of the floor of his studio in Galveston up with him to Houston. Harvey Bott, who opened a show this past weekend at the Anya Tisch Gallery in Houston. Also, Earl Staley opened a show this last weekend and at the Zoya Tome Gallery in Houston. At this time, the Contemporary Arts Museum was built in 1970, across the street from the Museum of Fine Arts. This new extension of the wing of the Museum of Fine Arts with James Sweeney's selection of this wonderful Alexander Calder to be out here, a very good stabile by Calder. The Roscoe Chapel over there opened with the Barnett Newman broken obelisk in honor of Martin Luther King. Opened. There's the inside of the chapel. I was there when they brought these paintings in from the roof. A little bit later, mid-'80s, early 80s, I guess, something like that. Along about that time. The Menil collection opened in this magnificent building by Renzo Piano, his first building in the United States. It was that year he won the Pritzker Prize. That piece of sculpture hanging is by Michael Heiser. I'm just showing you some high points now, having little to do with abstract expressionism, but I do believe that abstract expressionism opened the door for minimalism and earthworks and all kinds of other things. This great Michael Heiser that was installed at Rice University in the engineering quadrangle, 90, 45, 180 here, gigantic pieces of granite, so thick, in January of 1985. And then later in 1985, we have a Watershed Exhibition put together by Barbara Rose and Susie Khalil. Barbara Rose, an important curator operating out of New York, had been hired by the museum to put together some exhibitions for the museum at the end of the tenure of the then director of the museum, Bill Agee, because the other curators that had been working there hadn't been doing their work, and so they had to have some exhibitions. And one of the exhibitions that she put together, and there were a few that were quite excellent, was this one on the so-called Houston School. There is no Houston School, there's a Houston Bunch. It's not a school. And this show was remarkably uneven. There were very, very good people in the show. They were really just, how they got in the show, it must have been because they knew somebody. And so it was a very uneven show, but it was a very important show because it traveled to PS1 in New York, and people saw it, and they looked, and they said, oh yeah, there might be something down there in Texas after all. And then 10, 12 years ago, the museum opened another building, the Beck Building, here, and will, in about another 3 years, open another building which will more than double the space in the two current buildings, together with the Decorative Arts Building, the Rienzi for European Decorative Arts, and BioBen for American Decorative Arts. New building for the new Glassell School, and et cetera. And then, I guess about 20 years ago, the Renzo Piano building for the Cy Twomley Gallery, which is on the campus of the Menil collection. There will be another 4 buildings of this nature built on campus. The drawing building is, the drawing collections building is underway now. The Dan Flavin, permanent installation of the Dan Flavins on the Menil campus. And finally, the most recent big deal in Houston at Rice University, the largest of James Turrell's sky spaces, which is really quite nice to go and see. And that's pretty much it, except to say that there have been a whole bunch of new things that have happened in the way of opportunities for artists. As I said before, we have so many African American and Asian and Hispanic artists that are now really getting their due, more women, of course, but with Lawndale and Diverse Works, both alternative groups, the university galleries, both U of H and Rice, the Station Museum, the Houston Center for Photography, PhotoFest, the Galveston Art Center, and many, many more, and many, many important good galleries. And so that's Houston. Thank you very much.
We have a little bit of time for questions. If you have a question for Richard, I'll need to get you on the microphone because we're recording all of this. So anyone want to give it a shot?
I don't know how active you are in the scene today, but I'm wondering what the sort of current, if there is any, expressionist art scene in that area.
Abstract expressionism, is, like everything else is one thing that had its big moment and then it continues on. My paintings are different than what they were before. My work, like most people's work, is episodic. If you look at the great masters of both Jackson Pollock and William de Kooning, their work shifted and changed a lot over the course of their life. And unless it ended tragically as it did in the course of Mark Rothko. Or even Jackson Pollock, at the end there were those wonderful figurative things. If you think about those wonderful figurative things in terms of paintings, of course they're already there waiting to happen. One thing that you should remember about the majority of the people in this exhibition next door is that these were young people. There are paintings there that were done by these people who were in graduate school. I mean, these are people in their 20s and 30s for the most part doing those paintings. So you need to get busy. If you're an artist, you need to get busy and really kind of start thinking these things through and seeing what's happening. There's a lot that's going on. We have a real chopped and diced art world these days. And not only all the positions are so many varied positions and correct and right and so on. So you really have to chew your way through it. It's not as simple as looking at, oh, we have German Expressionism and French Modern and American point of view, and we can will from those three things what we want to do, because we really weren't really thinking about what was happening in too much and naive, or, oh yes, there's Henri Rousseau, and yes, and so on and so forth. But now these other issues are more central in a way. You have to really chew your way through it, and intellectually you have to think if it's going to have anything to do with you. You have to think about who you are and where you live and what makes you to be an artist. You don't shop like you might at a store for, oh, I'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and I'll be an artist. It doesn't work that way. You have to look at your education, your family. You want to live in some place that you're going to want to live for a long time. It's hard to haul stuff around. If you're a sculptor, it's impossible. So if you're an actor or a writer, it's easy. But if you're a painter, it's hard to haul stuff around. You lose it. Keep your records, keep your notes, keep your write some letters instead of always text. Writing is nice, and it's good for your mind. And understand that this, I mean, you don't get this period, you don't get this time again. You have this time, this place, these people, and it can work for you. And if you want to find a place that you really, really like. I'm from Texas. My father was born in Wellston, Oklahoma in 1892. My mother was born in Texas. You know, we've always been on something of a frontier. I like the idea of a frontier. I grew up in Beaumont, which is an oil town. It had stroke, but it was still an oil town. The only place that we could get away, either up to my aunt and uncle's little farm 20 miles north of town to see some cows and get some milk, was to get down to their place on East Galveston Bay at Rollover Bay, which was magical. I mean, I remember wonderful nights spent 20 feet from the water with my dad and uncle spearfishing for flounder with their lights, and I could hear them talking from a quarter mile away. That you just can't buy that kind of information. So enjoy where you are. Enjoy all those things. The nuance. I was telling some students today that they really should go out and paint from nature. Plein air is, you learn so much stuff just by looking and trying to translate what you see from nature. I paint plein air every week, and always have. It feeds me.
Richard, I was curious, was the Fresh Paint exhibition something of a sequel to the Houston School exhibition?
Is there a Houston School exhibition?
No, there was it seems like in the 80s there was a show that maybe Barbara Rose did called Fresh Paint.
The Houston School.
Oh, it's one and the same.
One and the same.
Okay,
except
I
it should
understand.
be called the Houston Bunch.
Right, and then a different question.
Yeah.
I saw in 2002 or thereabouts at your place some sculptures that you were making, metal sculptures.
Right.
Are you still doing those?
Yes, I'll give you a quick on that. My friend David Cargill, with whom I'm sharing this exhibition at Reeves, he is a more conservative sculptor. I posed for his first crucifixion when I was 17. introduced me to the work of Giacometti when I was about 14, and I fell in love and haven't fallen out of love. I like everything about Giacometti. I got to, Noguchi, well, he's good. I didn't know until later that why he was good is because I think it was Giacometti was his teacher. And I stopped working in any kind of sculpture by the time I was 22. I did a little bit at the Art Institute, but with what I could pour up in my apartment, and I'd make a piece in wax, and I'd put clay around it, and I'd heat it in the oven, and then drain it, and then I'd pour in some lead. I'd heat it on the stove and put in a piece of coat hanger so it could stand it up. I have one of those things left. Just when you're starting out and you don't have much time to do your work, and you don't have any money for extra stuff, and a tube of paint is in 1950 is $30 of red. You have to decide there's some things you can just put off to one side. So I looked at sculpture, I thought about sculpture, and I did some drawings maybe about things I might do, but I didn't start back into doing sculpture until my friend Michael Tracy, with whom I was visiting during the summers, during the summers when he leased a place outside of Leon, Mexico, on the mountaintop at La Luz. He leased an old mining complex, and he was doing some sculpture, and he said, well, next time I should come down, I should do some sculpture. So I went down in January of 1999 and did a piece, and we cast them until 2004. I cast them in Mexico City and since in Houston. And since that time, I've done about 200 pieces. Now, my sculptures are not like the sculptures that you see around. My sculptures are more like little scribbles in front of my paintings. They're really about me and my relationship to the world, or my relationship to my paintings. So my idea of my sculpture is that you should have a painting behind it, and in a way. And so they're really, they're done quickly, obviously 200, and they're all fairly small. The largest one's this big. And they're very open, they're very wiry. But I find it a very important and necessary thing to do. But expensive, you know, casting, even a unique is still expensive to do.
Other question? No one?
Stay busy.
All right, well, thank you, Richard. This was a great lecture. We appreciate you coming.